The ache began in my lower back, a dull, thrumming protest against the tyranny of cardboard and packing tape. For 2 days, that ache had been my constant companion, the physical manifestation of uprooting a life. But as I stood in the doorway of our new house, a bead of sweat tracing a path through the dust on my temple, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. This was it. Our forever home. The place where my wife, Amelia, and I could finally exhale. Cypress Creek Estates. The name itself sounded tranquil, conjuring images of gentle breezes and lazy afternoons. It was a picture-perfect diorama of suburban ambition, rows of immaculate beige houses with identical slate-gray roofs, lawns so green they looked like they'd been rendered by a computer, and a silence so profound it felt manufactured. After years in a cramped city apartment, the sheer space felt like a luxury. This, I told myself, was the quiet life we'd earned. I was a senior software architect, a man who wrangled chaos in the digital realm for a living. I craved order and predictability in my personal life. Amelia, well, she just craved a place where she could finally unpack the boxes that had followed her through a dozen different posts. David, you're just going to stand there and admire the threshold. Or are you going to grab the box labeled fragile kitchen stuff that will ruin your life if you drop it? Amy's voice, laced with the dry wit I'd fallen in love with, cut through my reverie. She stood by the moving truck, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and her dark hair pulled back in a ruthlessly efficient ponytail. Even in a paint-splattered t-shirt and ripped jeans, she possessed an unshakable core of competence, a stillness that made people instinctively straighten their posture. She was a force of nature packed into a deceptively average frame, and the anchor of my entire world. I grinned, wiping my forehead with the back of my arm, just mapping out the optimal data flow path for household goods. It's more complicated than you think. Just get the box, nerd. It was in that moment, a perfect, unscripted slice of our new life, that the first crack appeared in the facade of Cypress Creek. She emerged from the house directly across the street, a woman who seemed to be sculpted from disapproval and entitlement. She was dressed in a blindingly white tennis outfit that looked like it had never seen a court. Her blonde hair coiffed into a rigid, lacquered helmet. In one hand, she held a phone to her ear, and in the other, a clipboard. A clipboard. At 10 in the morning on a Saturday. She wasn't walking. She was marching. Each step on the pristine asphalt seemed to find fault with the very ground beneath her feet. Her eyes, magnified by a pair of oversized sunglasses, swept over our property, and I could practically feel the silent demerits accumulating. She stopped at the edge of our new lawn, a perfect little strip of public sidewalk separating her from our chaotic world of boxes and sweat. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the penetrating quality of a dental drill. I straightened up, forcing a neighborly smile. "Morning. We're the Chens, David and Amelia. Just moving in." She did not return the smile. Her gaze flickered from me to Amy, then to the moving truck, a small, perfect divot in the otherwise flawless lawn, where the truck's heavy rear tire had settled a half-inch onto the grass, seemed to cause her physical pain. Her lips thinned into a razor-sharp line. "I am Barbara Miller," she announced, as if presenting her credentials to a tribunal. "I am the president of the Cypress Creek Homeowners Association." "Ah, right. The HOA. Nice to meet you, Barbara," I said, extending a hand. She ignored it completely, her eyes fixed on the offending tire track. "I'm sure you've received and reviewed the covenants, conditions, and restrictions document, all 212 pages of it. I blinked. We've, uh, we've got it. It's in one of these boxes. Bit of a busy day, you know. Section 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 3. She recited from memory, her voice cold and flat. It explicitly states that no commercial vehicle over 1.5 tons may be parked on any residential street for a period exceeding 4 hours. Furthermore, Paragraph 7 of that same subsection prohibits any part of any vehicle from making contact with lawn surfaces, designated as common visual property, at any time. I stared at her, then at the tire mark, a barely perceptible crescent of crushed grass. Amy had stopped what she was doing and was now watching Barbara with an unnervingly placid expression. It was the look she got when she was observing something fascinating and slightly pathetic, like a documentary on insect behavior. "It's a moving truck," I said, my friendly demeanor starting to strain. "We're moving in. It'll be gone by tonight." "The bylaws are the bylaws," Barbara stated, making a sharp, decisive tick mark on a sheet of paper on her clipboard. "They exist to protect our property values and maintain the aesthetic harmony of the community. Exceptions are the first step toward entropy." I was about to argue, to point out the sheer absurdity of harassing new residents before they'd even unloaded their coffee maker, but Amy stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice calm and even, "we appreciate you bringing this to our attention. We'll be sure to have the vehicle moved as soon as possible. We wouldn't want to contribute to entropy." There was no sarcasm in her tone, just a flat, professional courtesy that seemed to momentarily disarm Barbara. The HOA president's eyes narrowed, searching for a hint of mockery, but finding none. She gave a curt, stiff nod. "See that you do," she said, before turning on her heel and marching back to her pristine beige fortress. I watched her go, the friendly neighborhood illusion shattering around me. "Wow," I breathed. "Welcome to Cypress Creek. I was expecting a fruit basket, not a bylaw citation." Amy was already hoisting a heavy box marked books. Every ecosystem has its apex predator. David. Ours just happens to wear Lululemon and carry a clipboard. She grunted with the weight of the box. "Come on, let's get this done. I have a feeling we're going to want to be fully compliant by nightfall." I looked at the perfect house, the perfect lawn, and the perfect little crack in the grass left by the truck. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I had a terrible feeling that our search for a quiet life had just delivered us to the front lines of a war we never wanted to fight. The first formal notice of violation was only the opening salvo in what quickly became a relentless war of paper cuts. It arrived 3 days after we moved in. A cream-colored envelope alleging improper waste receptacle display because we had put the bins out 12 hours early. The $50 fine felt less like a penalty and more like a declaration of hostilities. My immediate instinct was to fight, to appeal on grounds of common sense and decency. "We're not paying that," I declared to Amy over takeout on a cardboard box table. "It's a matter of principle." "It's a matter of strategy," she countered, her voice calm as she meticulously blotted the grease from her pizza slice. "This is a probe. David. She's testing our defenses. She wants a fight. If we give her one now, on this petty nonsense, we legitimize her authority and paint a target on our backs." Her advice was maddeningly logical. We comply. We document. We become the most boring, by-law-abiding residents in Cypress Creek history. We starve her of the drama she craves. So, I surrendered. I paid the fine. And I dove into the 212-page CC&R document, a tome of bureaucratic malice that governed everything from the approved species of mailbox-adjacent shrubbery to the maximum allowable decibel level of wind chimes. I did what I do best. I turned chaos into order. I created a spreadsheet, a fortress of compliance, cataloging every rule and deadline. I set calendar alerts. Our lives became dictated by the tyranny of the HOA bylaws. But our perfect compliance didn't bring peace. It only made her more creative. The first letter was followed by a volley, a relentless barrage of nitpicking citations, a $50 fine for an unapproved shade of beige on our welcome mat, a $75 penalty because our garden hose, left out for 30 minutes after I watered the new sod, was not coiled in a perfect, concentric circle. Then came a warning for excessive luminance from our porch light, which used the exact same wattage bulb as every other house on the street. Each envelope felt like a slap in the face. We paid every fine without protest. And with each payment, I could feel Barbara's frustration mounting from across the street. We were denying her the confrontation she desperately wanted. This methodical, paper-based assault was failing to break us. So she escalated. The attacks moved from our mailbox to our property itself. The first casualty was the Mr. Lincoln rosebush my mother had given us, a vibrant splash of personal color in a sea of prescribed conformity. I came out one morning to find every single nascent bud, every promise of a deep red bloom, snipped cleanly off. It was a precise, brutal act of vandalism, a clear message. Nothing beautiful is allowed to grow here without my permission. That was when Amy's strategy shifted from passive compliance to active defense. After examining the clean, 45-degree cuts on the stems, with the unnerving focus of a forensic investigator, she sent me to the electronics store. She's escalated from paper to property, Amy stated, her voice tight. We escalate from spreadsheets to surveillance. I spent an entire Saturday installing a state-of-the-art security system, the whir of my drill, a quiet act of rebellion. I mounted 4 high-resolution cameras under the eaves, creating overlapping fields of view that covered every inch of our front yard. Our house now had eyes. And we waited. We didn't have to wait long. A week later, we watched the grainy, night vision footage of a figure in a dark hoodie. A figure with Barbara's unmistakable, stiff-shouldered gait scurry up our driveway and deface our new mailbox with a streak of beige spray paint. We have her, I said, a surge of triumph in my chest. We have a hooded figure on a low-light video, Amy corrected, her voice a splash of cold water. She was always 3 steps ahead. It's strong circumstantial evidence, but it's not checkmate. She'll deny it. We don't show our hand. We let her think she's getting away with it. We let her get bolder. Her discipline was infuriating, but I trusted her. We filed a police report for the vandalism to create a paper trail, but didn't mention the footage. We let Barbara believe she was winning, unaware that we were logging every action, building an unassailable mountain of evidence. When direct vandalism failed to elicit the desired reaction, her campaign turned insidious, shifting from our property to our reputation. The Cypress Creek Estates Community Facebook group became her weapon. Vague posts about the importance of maintaining property values and community pride, clearly aimed at us, began to appear. Then came the block party, a public shaming masquerading as a celebration. Conversations would halt as we approached. People would physically move away. Barbara held court, pointedly ignoring us. And our offering of homemade baked beans sat untouched, a sad monument to our isolation. She had successfully poisoned the well, turning the entire neighborhood against us before they even knew our names. The online slander soon escalated to outright libel. A concerned post from Barbara appeared, warning the community that we might be running an unpermitted business from our home. citing fabricated reports of unusual traffic. It was a masterpiece of fiction. But in the vacuum of our forced isolation, her lies became the neighborhood's truth. Amy meticulously screenshotted everything, her digital file of evidence growing thicker each day. "Let her talk," she'd say, her eyes cold and focused. Every lie she tells in a public forum is another nail she's hammering into her own coffin. Her desperation for a reaction, for any sign that she was breaking us, led to her next major escalation. She began weaponizing city authorities. The first was a visit from a weary code enforcement officer, investigating an anonymous complaint about our perfectly legal tool shed. He measured it, sighed, and left. A week later, it was animal control, responding to a complaint about a vicious, barking dog. I had to explain to a very confused officer that our only pet was a goldfish named Finn Diesel. Each time, I would see Barbara watching from her porch, her frustration visibly growing as each official attempt to harm us was dismissed as unfounded. Each dismissed complaint was a victory that felt like a defeat. Another day disrupted. Another piece of our privacy chipped away. The failure of these official channels seemed to push her over the edge. Her attacks had been rebuffed. Her authority was being, in her mind, challenged by our silent, perfect compliance. She needed to make us feel her power directly. This led to the final, terrifying escalation. The moment the war ceased to be about bylaws and became about our survival. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, while Amy was away for a regional management conference. Barbara must have seen me as alone, and therefore vulnerable. She came to my door, not with a notice, but with a face twisted in raw fury. She dispensed with all pretense. "We need to talk about your little business," she hissed. When I calmly repeated that, "I worked remotely," she put her hand on my door to stop me from closing it. Her eyes were chips of ice. "You think you're so smart, don't you? I know you work for Viridian Dynamics," she said. And my blood ran cold. She had researched me. It would be a real shame if their human resources department got an anonymous tip about an employee running an illegal side business and creating a hostile environment in his community. She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "People like you don't belong here, and I will do whatever it takes to get you out." The threat, raw and personal, hung in the air. It was no longer about house colors or lawn maintenance. She was threatening my career, our financial security, our future. She was threatening my family. A cold, protective rage eclipsed my fear. "Get off my property," I said, my voice dangerously level. "If you ever contact my employer, I will take legal action." She laughed. "You are nothing," she spat, before turning and marching away. As soon as the door was closed and locked, I called Amy, my hands shaking. I recounted every word. On the other end of the line, there was a long, chilling silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely devoid of emotion. A flat, terrifying calm that was more menacing than any shout. "Okay," she said. She did it. She finally crossed the line. "What do we do?" I whispered. "You do nothing," she commanded. "You lock the doors. You make sure the system is recording. I'm handling it. I'm coming home. My conference just ended early." There was a finality in her tone that left no room for argument. The long game was over. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew with absolute certainty that Barbara Miller had just made the final and biggest mistake of her life. Amy arrived home late Friday afternoon, moving with a controlled, deliberate energy that was unnerving. A storm was gathering behind her calm eyes. She didn't unpack. She walked straight into my office and said, "Play the porch footage from Wednesday." We watched it together. The insistent doorbell, my strained patience, her hand on our door, her smug, venomous threat. The audio was crystal clear. Amy watched it twice without a word, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, a short, sharp gesture of finality. "Okay. Attempted blackmail. That's the felony we needed." She saved a copy of the video to the secure drive, her movements precise. "Now," she said, turning to me, her voice low. We set the stage for the final act. On Saturday morning, the trap was baited. Amy began unloading a series of heavy-duty, black Pelican-style cases from the trunk of her car. They were the kind used for secure transport of sensitive equipment, utterly anonymous and deeply suspicious to an uninformed observer. "Just some old work gear I had in storage," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard across the street. Time to finally sort through it. She began carrying them into the garage, one by one. It was a perfectly mundane activity, yet charged with an unspoken purpose. Across the street, Barbara's curtains twitched. I could feel her gaze, a palpable heat. To her, this scene was the confirmation of all her paranoid fantasies. The shadowy wife, back from a mysterious trip, unloading unmarked black cases. This was it. This was the irrefutable proof she needed. I watched from the living room window as she stepped onto her porch, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was a mask of vindictive triumph. She was pointing, her voice a shrill, urgent buzz that I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. She was making the call. "She's doing it," I said, walking into the garage as Amy stacked the last box. Amy paused and looked at me. For the first time in months, she smiled. It was a grim, cold, terrifying smile. "Good," was all she said. The response was faster than I expected. Within 5 minutes, 2 Oak County Sheriff's Department cruisers rolled down our street. They didn't use their sirens, approaching with a professional quiet that was somehow more menacing. They parked at the curb, and 2 deputies emerged, a young man and a slightly older woman. Their faces were impassive, their movements economical. Barbara, however, was anything but calm. She practically flew off her porch, her body vibrating with righteous glee. She met the deputies on the sidewalk, launching into a loud, frantic monologue designed for an audience. "Thank God you're here. Officers," she exclaimed, pointing a trembling finger at Amy, who was now standing by her car, arms crossed, waiting. "That woman, I've never seen her before. She's trespassing. She's been unloading suspicious containers all morning. She's probably a burglar, maybe even running some kind of trafficking ring. This is a private, family community. You have to do something." The deputies exchanged a brief, weary look. They had the practiced air of people who dealt with concerned suburbanites all day. They approached the driveway, their hands loosely resting on their belts. "Ma'am," the male deputy said, his voice a carefully neutral baritone. "We've received a call about a potential burglary in progress. Could you please identify yourself and tell us what you're doing here?" He took a half step forward. "Please keep your hands where we can see them." This was it. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Amy didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted past the 2 deputies, her focus narrowing on something down the street. A third vehicle, a black, unmarked Ford Explorer, had just pulled up. A man in a crisp sheriff's uniform with captain's bars on his collar stepped out. He was older, with a salt and pepper buzz cut, and the tired, authoritative posture of a career lawman. He began walking towards the scene, his expression one of paternal weariness. Then his eyes fell on Amy. Time seemed to slow down. The captain's steady stride faltered. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in utter, profound shock. The weary slump in his shoulders vanished, instantly replaced by a rigid, military bearing. He strode forward, his pace quickening, his polished boots clicking sharply on the pavement. He walked right past his two bewildered deputies, who turned to see what could possibly have caused such a radical transformation in their superior. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of my wife, his back as straight as a steel rod. A single, sharp sound cut through the neighborhood's manufactured silence. The captain's right hand snapped up in a salute so crisp, so perfect, it seemed to vibrate in the air. "Sheriff Vance!" he barked, his voice ringing with a mixture of shock and absolute deference. "Ma'am, we had no idea you were on site. My apologies for the intrusion." The world pivoted on that sound. The chirping of birds, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the very air itself seemed to freeze. The two deputies stared, their jaws slack, their brains trying to process the impossible scene, their commanding officer saluting a woman in a sweaty t-shirt and jeans, who they were just about to question as a potential burglar. And Barbara, oh, Barbara. Her reaction was a sight I will cherish for the rest of my days. The triumphant, vindictive color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, mottled white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes, wide with a horror that was just beginning to dawn, darted from the saluting captain to Amy, then back again. The name Sheriff Vance was echoing in the cavernous, silent space where her arrogance used to be. The puzzle pieces were slamming into place, not with a gentle click, but with the force of a car crash. Amy, my wife, the sheriff of Oak County, returned the captain's salute with a casual, practiced flick of her wrist. At ease. "Captain Miller," she said, her voice quiet, yet it carried across the driveway with an authority that was absolute. "There's no intrusion. It seems we have a false alarm." Her eyes, cold and hard as diamonds, shifted to Barbara. "Our HOA president, Mrs. Miller, has a history of making false reports. This appears to be the latest in a long series of them." The captain dropped his salute, his face hardening into a mask of grim understanding. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon Barbara Miller. It was a look that could curdle milk. And Barbara Miller, the woman of 1,000 bylaws and 1,000,000 complaints, the queen of Cypress Creek, finally went silent. Her entire world, built on a foundation of petty rules and imagined power, had just been demolished by a single, simple gesture of respect she had neither earned nor understood. She stood there, trembling, a hollowed-out monument to her own malice, finally face to face with real authority. The aftermath was a quiet, methodical execution of justice, which was far more devastating to Barbara than any dramatic confrontation could have been. Amy, as Sheriff Vance, recused herself from the proceedings, handing the entire case file to her chief deputy to avoid any conflict of interest. She knew the system she commanded would work perfectly without her thumb on the scale. On our driveway, under the warm Saturday sun, the official investigation unfolded. I presented Captain Miller with my meticulously organized evidence, the spreadsheet of fines, the time-stamped photos of the vandalism, the cloud-saved video files. We played the clip of Barbara defacing our mailbox, followed by the high-fidelity audio of her threatening my career on our front porch. Each piece of evidence was logged by the deputies with a grim professionalism. Barbara, no longer able to flee or dissemble, simply stood there, a ghost at her own execution. Her attempts to stammer out denials crumbled into incoherent muttering under the captain's cold, steady gaze. The citation for filing a false police report, a serious misdemeanor in our county, was written on the spot. But that was merely the overture. The complete file, a comprehensive narrative of targeted harassment, was forwarded to the district attorney's office. Faced with an irrefutable mountain of video, photographic, and official evidence, Barbara was charged with multiple counts of harassment, stalking, and felony attempted blackmail. Her lawyer, seeing no viable defense, advised a plea bargain. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, a substantial fine paid to a victims' advocacy fund, and 200 hours of community service. In a stroke of poetic justice, her service involved scrubbing graffiti from public property. A permanent restraining order forbade her from ever contacting us or setting foot on our property again. The social fallout was just as absolute. The story of the HOA president calling the cops on the county sheriff became an instant local legend. The neighborhood Facebook group, once her personal echo chamber, erupted in a firestorm of condemnation. At an emergency HOA meeting, she was unanimously and summarily removed from her presidency. The power she had so carefully cultivated vanished overnight. The house went on the market less than 3 months later. With the source of the toxicity gone, the neighborhood began to heal. A new, reasonable HOA board was elected, and their first act was to schedule a community meeting to simplify the labyrinthine bylaws. People started talking to each other again. One evening, a neighbor, the same woman who had moved away from me at the block party, knocked on our door with a bottle of wine, her face etched with genuine remorse. "We're so sorry," she said. "We let ourselves be misled. We'd like to properly welcome you to the neighborhood." A year after our ordeal began, Amy and I sat on our back patio. The Mr. Lincoln rose bush was covered in spectacular, fragrant blooms. The peace was no longer a fragile hope. It was a tangible presence, a comfortable quiet that had settled deep into the bones of the house. "A regional management conference," I said, looking at her. That was a pretty good cover story. She smiled, a real, relaxed smile that reached her eyes. "Annual State Sheriff's Association seminar," she admitted. "Mostly boring policy updates and budget meetings. But," she added, her eyes twinkling, "it felt important that our case was built by David Chen, private citizen, not by the sheriff's husband. Your testimony, your evidence. It was all from the perspective of the victim. It made it pure. It made it unassailable." I reached across the small table and took her hand. The calluses on her palm were a familiar comfort. I still can't decide what my favorite part was. I mused. The look on her face, or the sound the captain's hand made when he saluted you. Amy squeezed my hand, her gaze turning thoughtful as she looked out over the lawn we had fought so hard for. "Justice is a process, David," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's loud and fast, but sometimes it's slow and methodical. Sometimes you just have to give people enough rope." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "And sometimes," she whispered with a grin, "you get to be there when they finally hang themselves with it." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The war was over. Our house was no longer a fortress, but a sanctuary. It was finally, truly, our home.